Hi everybody, you're listening to Comics and History, episode number 130, Canadian Comics Roundup, with a look at some works by Sam Noir, Jason Liu, and Chapter House Comics. And welcome to the show. I am your host, Brian J. Rygate, and class is back in session. And I've been thinking about doing a Canadian Comics Roundup for a while. I know it was only a couple of episodes ago where I was looking at Cauldron from Sam Noir and company, but in terms of being able to look at multiple books, I figured something fun to do this summer. I was hoping to have more content for this episode, specifically from Chapter House Comics. I was really hoping to pick up the Free Comic Book Day issue of Captain Canuck, but I have not found it. As you'll hear on the show later on, I do have some words to say about Chapter House, but fortunately I was able to pick up one of the releases from last year to include with my talk about Chapter House in general. So I'm going to look at a couple of works from Sam Noir and a couple of very talented artists who worked with him on these two books. I'll also be talking about two books from Jason Liu, the creator of The Pitiful Human Lizard, and from July 1st, 2018, I'll be looking at the Chapter House Captain Canuck Invasion issue, which promises to lead into the next major story arc going on in Captain Canuck and in the Chapterverse in general. So, spoilers ahead for this episode. I'm going to try not to get too in-depth with the spoilers because I'm looking at independent works of art. And so really, I don't want anybody to come out of this episode saying, well, I don't have to give these books a try. I've listened to the show. My words can't do justice to the titles, which I'll be looking at on this show. So let's start off with a look at a couple of works from Sam Noir. The first book I want to talk about, it's one I've been wanting to talk about for a while. A really great short story from Sam and artist Christopher Yao. It's called Dwayne's Inferno, and this is certainly not Sam and Chris's first time working together. Of course, they worked on Major North, which appeared in Toronto Comics Anthology and was then printed as a standalone book. And Major North is also going to be printed again in color in an upcoming Kickstarter, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. But I really want to talk about Dwayne's Inferno because I picked it up on one occasion where Victoria and I got to meet Sam, and it was a really great read. So the protagonist of this story is a boy named Dwayne, and he comes across as your stereotypical, for lack of a better word, spawn of the demon child. He's got very dark hair, which falls into his eyes. He's got an almost permanent disaffected scowl, which belies a sense of anger and isolation. Underneath, he's wearing his preparatory school uniform, the jacket, and the corresponding shorts. And he just comes across as somebody who prefers to spend time on his own, and one might presume that others in the community are quite okay with him being on his own. So in this story, which is mostly a silent issue, we see Dwayne taking the walk home from his school, very telling that there's nobody else on the streets, suggests that maybe people make sure to run inside, shutter the doors and the windows when they see him coming. But along the walk home, we see a ghoul walking behind Dwayne. And in life, she was a young woman. And what's really scary about this ghoul, in addition to her pale complexion and her lack of facial expression, is she's wearing a nightgown, but it appears to be bloodied in the abdominal region. And Dwayne seems entirely disaffected by this, and he makes his way home, and we see him preparing dinner, and he sits down for dinner, and at that point, that's where we start getting some dialogue, and we learn exactly what the true relationship is between Dwayne and this ghoul. And of course, I'm not going to spoil it for you. I'm just going to say that when you read it, it makes you say, oh, of course, I should have seen that. And at the same time, there's an element of tragedy to it, not only for the ghoul, but for Dwayne as well. And on the last page, in true Sam Noir fashion, we get an ending which is both sweet and horrific at the same time. We have a sense of relief and happiness for both Dwayne and the ghoul, but at the same time, you look at Christopher Yao's haunting artwork, you just say, ooh. I'm glad that this story is coming to an end here. Thank you, Sam and Chris, for a wonderful story, but I don't think we need to see any more of these two. There's certainly a match, and we'll just leave it at that. But it's a sort of story where you can't help but come back to it. I've read it cover to cover several times, and each time I pick up something new, whether it be a nuance in Sam's writing or something in Christopher's art. It's, again, a hallmark of Sam Noir's collaboration with his artists. He always picks the perfect artist who can speak to the tone of the story, and it becomes a true collaboration between the writer and the artist. And we see it in the fact that so much of this story is silent. There's no need for text boxes or word balloons. Sam has a very good sense of where Christopher can tell the art on his own. And then at that critical moment, that's where we need the dialogue. And that's where we need the perspective, the context on what exactly is going on with this little boy and the school who is following him. Really great story. And what's really neat is that there's some back matter too. It shows that at one point Sam and Christopher were looking at this as being maybe not a weekly strip, but a series of strips with a more comedic bent to it, where we see that Dwayne is very much a spawn of the devil, but there's also something more childlike, more mischievous about him. And in the back matter, we see that in this prototypical story, Dwayne has a mom who is looking to start a relationship with the new guy, and the way this new guy responds to Dwayne, it's sweet and it's funny at the same time. And there's some really neat stuff both from the writing end and the art side, and that we see little things that give us more perspective on Dwayne. And we want to say to the guy who is interested in Dwayne's mother, buddy, we'd like to think that you're a saint, but at the same time, buddy, maybe you should run at this point. So just a really great story from Sam and Christopher Yao. All right, on to my second piece from Sam. It's the Victorian 4 issue number 0 Redux, with art by the very talented Matt Tavares. And I recorded a complete standalone review of Victorian 4, which you can find on the Comics and History archives. And if you haven't listened to it, I highly encourage you to do so. I love this series, and it's a killer for me that Sam and Matt are both so busy in multiple endeavors that this isn't a monthly title. But so far 3 issues have come out, and it's just been great stuff, and I can't wait for issue number 3 to come out. I want to say I mentioned this when I reviewed Victorian 4 issues 0 through 2. The artwork in the 0 issue is different from what came in issues 1 and 2. Well, first off, for those of you who haven't listened to the show and don't know what exactly the Victorian 4 is, it is an ongoing title from Sam and Matt, and it tells the story of a group of Victorian-era characters, both fictional and real-life historical characters, who team up to stop an alien conspiracy. And what's really interesting about the alien conspiracy is that it's not targeting just humans alone. It's also targeting innocent aliens. And I think that's a really neat twist on the usual alien conspiracy, where it's all about aliens versus humans alone. And the Victorian 4 are an interesting group. You have Abraham Lincoln, who, after being assassinated by John Wilkes Booth, was bitten and turned into a vampire. And so at this point, President Lincoln has managed to recover, I'd say, much of his intellect and his memories, but he's riddled with guilt because he has a sense that during his early days as a vampire, he did some pretty awful stuff. And he wants to atone for that. Just, he doesn't know exactly what he did or who he affected, but he comes across as a very honorable character in this series. There's Sherlock Holmes, who fought Professor Moriarty at Reichenbach Falls, and together with Moriarty fell to his death, only to be revived, his brain transplanted into the body of Frankenstein's monster. And so we see Holmes in the monster's body, putting back on the iconic cloak and deerstalker cap, picking up the pipe, and resuming his career as the sitting, or not so sitting, detective. There's Madame Curie, who, after prolonged exposure to radiation, has found herself changed into very much a Bruce Banner slash Hulk type character, in that when she gives in to stronger emotions, she basically hulks up, and she becomes this incredibly powerful being, and she still maintains her intellect, but at the same time, she's got to work on keeping her cool. And then there's John Henry, man who, of course, competed against the Machine to see who was the strongest wielder of the hammer. And it appears that John Henry has not been augmented in any way. And perhaps that's a good thing, given what's going on with his 3 teammates. Probably best that you have somebody who is whole in mind, body, and soul. I get a bit of a